Hey guys, thanks for coming back and joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Glad to have you back. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about and cover some statistics around gun ownership and gun violence in the United States. So, this is a topic that every election cycle comes up, is controversial, makes sense, it's emotional. The Second Amendment guarantees the right to bear arms. There's the line in there about well trained militia. So you should go back and watch. We did an episode on the Second Amendment and talked about specifically how that amendment was developed. And you should go back and watch that episode because I think you can learn a lot around the thought process for the Second Amendment. It is absolutely in place so that the citizenry of each state has access to guns in the event they have to defend themselves or fight back against a tyrannical central government. So, we've talked before on this channel. Staunch freedom supporters were very libertarian. So, fiscally super conservative and socially very liberal. So, no surprise, we are big Second Amendment supporters. So, with that said, let's get a couple of things out of the way right up front. Whenever the topic of guns comes up, it inevitably winds up in a binary choice of if you support the Second Amendment, you don't care about gun deaths or children dying or innocent lives being lost due to gun violence. And that's just false. There's nobody out there that is in support of gun violence. Nobody's in support of innocent people dying from guns. So, regardless of which side of the argument you are on, both sides are aligned that we would love to find a way to stop gun violence. Now, where the difference comes in is the side for gun control thinks, okay, so if nobody has a gun, you can't shoot anybody. Got it. I would argue that's overly simplistic, and we're going to go through a couple of facts here that show, in my mind, a direct correlation that gun ownership is not correlated with the rate of gun deaths in a country. But with that said, it doesn't change the fact that gun owners, tons of gun owners, millions, hundreds of millions of gun owners are on that same side. Nobody wants gun violence, nobody wants gun deaths, but people are not willing to give up their rights and their freedoms for no reason. In their mind, it's for no reason. So I think framing the conversation that way hopefully should take some air out of the controversy that surrounds this topic sometimes. So, with that, let's jump into the statistics that we were able to pull. So, according to the CDC, there are roughly 38,000 gun deaths in 2016. Of those 38,000, 2/3 of them were suicides. And look, suicide's a terrible thing, but suicide is a mental health issue. It's not a gun issue. The fact that they chose a gun to commit suicide is sad, but it's not a reason to outlaw guns. I mean, you could outlaw knives, you could outlaw people drown themselves, people kill themselves in all sorts of different ways. And suicide's a terrible thing, but that in of itself is not a reason to ban guns. So, interesting statistic. There are over 300 million guns in the United States currently. So if there was if guns were the problem, we would know it because there's 300 million guns in the country already. The vast majority, 99% plus of gun owners are law-abiding citizens who do not commit violence, who do not shoot anybody, whether they're innocent or not. So it's important to keep that in mind that if guns were the problem, we would know it. We would know it immediately because there would be a huge outbreak of gun violence if that was the problem. It's just not. 300 million guns in the United States, less than 40,000 people killed by guns every year. 2/3 of those self-inflicted. Those are suicides. So I think those are good facts to keep in mind. There are 5 times more murders every year in the U.S. On average, committed by knives than there are by rifles. So I thought that was an interesting statistic. And it's rifles, so handguns are not included in that statistic, but we hear a lot about the AR-15 and weapons of war and those kinds of things. People use knives to commit murders more than they use rifles. So that in and of itself is a pretty interesting statistic from my perspective and something to keep in mind when you're having conversations around gun control and the Second Amendment and this whole topic. So the U.S. absolutely has the highest gun ownership rate in the world. So per capita, the U.S. owns more guns than any other nation. So it's not even close. With that said, it ranks 28th in the world in gun murders per capita. That breaks down to about 2.97 deaths per 100,000 people. So even though the U.S. has, if that were the problem, if guns were the problem, it would stand to reason that the country that had the most guns also had the highest murder rate by gun. And the U.S. is 28th in the world. So those two things are not correlated. Handguns are responsible for more than 80% of total mass shootings. So even though an AR, which by the way, the AR stands for the company that makes it, it's not assault rifle. Um, it's 80% of total mass shootings are committed by handgun. So those are pistols, those are revolvers, those are Glocks, those are the guns you can hold in one hand. So the AR-15, while it's demonized because it has been used in some mass shootings, the vast majority of mass shootings are committed by handgun. So another interesting number to keep in the back of your head. Between 1993 and 2003, gun ownership increased by 56%, while gun violence decreased by nearly half. So, again, if there was a direct correlation between gun ownership and gun murders or gun violence, those numbers should move in the same direction. And they did not. So, between 1993 and 2003, gun ownership went up by more than half, while gun violence decreased by nearly half. So interesting numbers there. Since 1950, nearly all mass public shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. So if you are mentally ill, and clearly anyone that commits a mass shooting is mentally ill, they have clearly don't value life. They clearly don't have all their faculties about them, especially someone that go to a school and shoot kids. But they know that they can go to those places without fear of being shot themselves, or at least for a while until somebody else shows up with a gun. So since 1950, that's 70 years, that's 75 years almost. Nearly all mass public shootings happen in gun-free zones. From 2013 to 2015, there were 6 states that banned open carry during that period. And they experienced higher rates of police deaths than states that did not ban open carry. So, for those that don't know, open carry is I can walk around holding a gun. I can walk around with a rifle slung over my shoulder. Most states have some requirement for a concealed carry. You have to get a permit. And I think that's a good thing. I've used guns since I was a kid. My dad was a hunter, and he taught me how to use guns safely and took it very serious. I mean, the very first lesson that you learn in gun safety is never point a gun at something unless you're willing to shoot it. And so you should never point a gun at a person, whether it's unloaded, whether you're joking around. It's not funny. It's not a joke. That's very seriously drilled into your head if you take gun safety classes. So a bigger problem, in my opinion, is uneducated, untrained people handling weapons. So there's people that die from discharges from mishandling weapons and shooting themselves by mishandling the weapon every year. And that's a big problem. But when you see that states that ban open carry have more police deaths, that flies against the argument that guns are the problem. It's really people that are the problem. So along lines of concealed carry, those that have concealed carry permits commit on average less crime than police. So I thought that was a very interesting statistic. So people that and you're registered. So I have a concealed carry permit in multiple states, and it's different state by state, but they all seem to have some type of central repository where you go and apply, and they have your name, they have your address. I've never had to say what kind of guns I had, but they know who I am, they know where I am, and that I have a concealed carry permit. And those people commit less violence or less crime than police. So I thought that was very interesting as well. So let's compare the U.S. to another nation, Switzerland. Switzerland is a nation of about 8 million people, and it has an estimated 2 million guns in the country. So they have very limited gun regulation. It's pretty encouraged for the Swiss people to own firearms. So their overall gun homicide rate is statistically zero. It doesn't mean no one's ever killed by a gun, but it's so rare that the number of people killed by a gun divided by the number of people in the nation statistically works out to zero. So if guns were the problem, a nation like Switzerland that had 2 million guns floating around should have more gun deaths. So I think that goes to show that the problem is much more cultural than it is access to guns. And like, I don't even say mental health or drugs because I'm certain people in Switzerland have mental health problems. I'm certain people in Switzerland have drug problems. So it's got to be cultural when you look around the world and look at other nations that have high rates of gun ownership, but lower death rates than the United States. So I don't think confiscating guns from law abiding citizens is the solution that we're looking for to prevent these gun deaths. So I think we should continue to talk about it because it'd be great to figure out a solution so people weren't, innocent people in particular, weren't dying from gun violence. But banning, taking away the rights of law abiding people does not look like the answer to me at all when you look at the numbers. When you take emotion out of it and look at the numbers, the two things do not correlate. So, and that's across the world. Across the world, gun ownership rate does not correlate with homicide rate. You can find nations with high gun ownership rate and low homicide rates. You can find nations with low ownership rates and high homicide rates. So they're not directly correlated. If those things were true, they'd be true all the time. That's how math and statistics work, and they're just not true. So I think it's a good thing to keep in mind. It's a good thing to think about when we're having these conversations. And along the terms of regulation, there are currently, right now, there's over 20,000 gun control laws between each state and the federal level. So well regulated. Yes, I think guns are regulated. Um, the When you think about it, murder is already illegal. That's the worst crime that you can think of, violent crime that you can think of. It's the one with the longest sentences. It's the one you typically get life without parole, et cetera, et cetera. We already have 20,000 laws on the books between states and municipalities and the federal government. And people are still willing to commit murder. If they're willing to commit murder, they're willing to break a law to find a gun to do it if they want to use a gun. So, again, when you think through it, when you apply logic instead of emotion to the challenge that we're facing here, guns just don't appear to be the problem. On average, less than 10,000 people are murdered by gun violence annually. So, in a nation of our size, about 330 million people, that is a rate of 0.00003% of the population. So, that's removing suicides, that's removing police shootings, and police shootings run about 1,200 a year, by the way. And that's removing death by accident, discharge. I'm screwing around with a gun and accidentally shoot myself. Those run a couple hundred a year. But there's less than 10,000 people murdered, which is 0.00003% of the population. So, look, I'm not trying to diminish gun violence at all. It's a sad thing when it happens. It is senseless. It is tragic. There's tons and tons of examples that show how terrible it is. And any law abiding citizen, any decent human being wants to find a solution to prevent that from happening. With all that said, there's nothing statistically that suggests that banning guns or making it harder to get guns or banning assault weapons. I would challenge, what is an assault weapon? You need to define what an assault weapon is, because when we break it down, automatic weapons are already illegal. You have to have a very special permit, or it's very hard to get permission to own a machine gun where you just hold the trigger down and the gun keeps shooting rounds. Semi-automatics are legal. An AR-15 is a semi-automatic. A Glock pistol is a semi-automatic. A revolver is semi-automatic. You have to pull the trigger and one round comes out. For another round to come out, you have to pull the trigger again. So we really need to remove the emotion from it if we really and truly want to solve the problem and not make this a political issue, but make it a human issue, make it a life issue. We need to think about it differently, and we need to pay attention to the statistics. We need to stop arguing about whether we should ban guns or not, and we should look at real solutions around mental health, around culture, around how it is that we're raising people that think it's okay to point a gun at somebody else and pull the trigger. To me, that's the real issue, and banning guns isn't going to solve the cultural issue that we're facing. So I hope you guys find those useful. I always find it interesting to dig into the facts when I'm trying to figure out how to think about a situation. And I found this research, personally, I found this research very interesting. So I hope you did too. Thanks again, guys, for coming back. We appreciate you checking out our channel. Head on over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. You can find all of our podcast episodes on there. Our daily newsletter is available on there, which you can also subscribe to get sent to your email. And we'd love it if you could like and subscribe and comment on our videos and our podcast episodes on whatever platform you consume that content on. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate you having you back, and have a great week. We'll see you next time.